Hello, everyone. Welcome to Will's first A Song of Ice and Fire hour. I'm probably going to shorten it to SEOF, the acronym for A Song of Ice and Fire, but you guys here for the first one probably don't know about that. I'm going to probably be talking about a lot of the prose as I read through it, but I do also want to be able to go off topic and kind of just talk about other things in the books as we go. Where are your aesthetic shelves full of special editions? I don't do that. I got mine used. I think a Dance of Dragons I got new. Everything else has been used. I don't buy books because I'm a library kid. We were poor. I will try to color code these at some point just so we can make some success as a channel. But I have also been meaning to cover this up for 2 years now, and it has not happened. If anything, it's now gotten a little bit messier because I have shelves here now. Okay, so the chapters we're doing today are the last 3 Dany chapters from A Game of Thrones. I really like these chapters because they have some of the creepiest magic stuff in the series, and that is one of the things that I love about A Song of Ice and Fire, and one of the things that really changed my writing style. Where's the sparkly lights? I know, I'm thinking about it. I feel like it could be successful. It really changed how I viewed magic because before that, everything was a very hard magic system. And then I realized like, oh, you can do creepy, weird things with magic if you just like ratchet down how much of it is normal. And you do like a little bit more of like a horror vibe to it. And I feel like the chapter that's really known for this is the Shadow Baby in book 2. And then also the House of the Undying vision, which we will probably get to at some point. I kind of want to go through those, but I also just like these 3 chapters because I feel like these are the 3 last Dany chapters. I call them the Magi arc because she meets an old woman who's a blood magi, probably. And I also like what's going on with the characters. I wish what I had done is I had gotten a bunch of pictures so that they could be on screen while I was talking, because that would be very cool and like I was a real streamer. But for right now, that is not going to happen. I'm also not really sure how long this is going to go on. I tend to tire out at about an hour. Magi, I'm not sure it really means wise, though. Mary seems like someone who'd lie. Yeah, she lies a lot. I actually really like her as a character, even if she is kind of like not a great person, but also she stopped like a genocidal maniac. So I can't feel too bad about it. But that's kind of what's interesting about this chapter. So we're going to go ahead and start. And one of the things is I didn't really read these chapters beforehand. I read the chapter by chapter analysis by Race for the Iron Throne, which I will link in the descriptions. In these, though, these were still early when he was doing them. And so like there's not as much thematic and story discussion in his ones. It was really the historical analysis and then like a what if scenario and the political analysis, which was interesting, definitely, but like not necessarily as crunchy as I would have liked in terms of the or not as crunchy as I thought they were going to be in terms of the story. So I think I still can have some interesting stuff to say. Okay, so let us share screen. This is the show version of Marie Miraz-Dur. Now, so prior to this, you really should know the story by now, but if you don't, just to catch you up and remind you, Dany is married to a guy called Khal Drogo. They are discount Mongolian Native Americans. It's not great how he treats their culture, but whatever. They go around murdering and killing and slaving people. And she was someone that Dany had saved from a previous raid they did where they just slaughtered a bunch of sheep people, as they call them. And Dany was like trying to make things better for like living conditions. Like later she'll become the freer of slaves. But at this point, she was just trying to do it like piecemeal. And she was like very proud that she had saved this woman. And in the raid on that village, Khal Drogo, her husband, right, had gotten a slash across like his shoulder or chest or something like that. There's a discussion of nipples, which I don't love, I think, in this part. And it had become infected. And so this lady had Dany wanted to show that, you know, slaves could be useful if we don't kill and R-word them. And so she'd had this lady who is a magi, a magic woman, though, again, magic at this point is like, is it real? Is it not? Bind it with a poultice. And the poultice had fire seeds within it. So she was like, it's going to scratch, but don't take it off. The fire is cleansing, which already it's like, oh, the red mage. And then he does, and it gets worse. And so that's where we're at the beginning of this chapter. Let us switch over to Share screen. The flies circled Khal Drogo slowly, their wings buzzing, a low thrum at the edge of hearing that filled Dany with dread. So again, I don't want to get too much into discussing the pros, but I do find this interesting that, okay, so there's some good sensory information here. Their wings buzzing. There's a strong image. The flies circled Khal Drogo slowly, their wings buzzing, a low thrum at the edge of hearing. And I don't love that filled Dany with dread, but here's the thing. This is going to basically, usually I say like you shouldn't keep abstract words like dread, that filled Dany with dread. That's not super helpful. But what works here is that this works sort of as a thesis statement for the rest of what happens here. Because for the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He basically Martin does not have another description of Dany, what Dany is thinking. It's just sensory details and background, and that's one of the things he does really well. So we have the sun was high and pitiless, heat shimmered in waves off the stony outcrops of low hills. A thin finger of sweat trickled slowly between Dany's swollen breasts. Oh yeah, she's very pregnant by this point. The only sounds were the steady clop of their horses' hooves, the rhythmic tingle of the bells in Drogo's hair, and the distant voices behind them. Dany watched the flies. See, this is a really nice sentence because it goes, okay, this is what she's focusing on. And there's almost kind of like a growing dread throughout this that I think works really well without like telling you through what details she's focusing on and what she's thinking about. That's you can tell what she's thinking, and it also helps the reader build it. Yeah, see, like he does not, Dany could see how drawn his face had become. Yet he scarcely touched his food and thrashed and groaned in the night. That's a very nice trick he does. So he has the sentence topic or the paragraph or the chapter topic up here. So therefore, all of this is then understood to be connected back to that. Also, don't drink seed of the poppy. Oh yeah, no, they call it milk of the poppy, which is kind of gross. I wish they had come up with another word for it. And so he's getting eaten by flies, which are gross. And I live in Florida, so I understand blood flies. We call them mosquitoes, but they're still gross. Okay, and so then he falls off his horse, which for the Dothraki, super big problem. If you can't ride your horse, you're not like a man. You can't lead a Khalazar, which is their word for like a Mongol horde. Let's see. I wanted to start with. So there's a lot of like good, like the situation is ramping up. People are scared of it, and basically Dany calls for that the god's wife is actually what they call her, the Miraz Mazdur. And the first sentence, I think we could get rid of the adverb. Which one? The flies circled Khal Drogo slowly. The flies circled Khal Drogo, their wings buzzing. Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think maybe it gives a little bit of a sense of like laziness to the air, like heat. But yeah, you don't really, strictly speaking, need it. And so she's going to have them set up a tent. Furious, Quotha wheeled his stallion, galloped off in anger. But Dany knew he would return with Miraz Mazdur, however he might like it. The slaves erected Khal Drogo's tent beneath a jagged outcrop of black rock whose shadow gave some relief from the heat of the sun. Even so, it was stifling under the sand silk. This is another thing, is that he sets up the heat really nicely at several points, which in terms of like a sense, it's we talk about different sensory information besides visuals in books to kind of ground you. And this one is like, heat is not, or not heat, but temperature is not necessarily one people think about, but it's actually kind of it's kind of one that we all experience all the time. They stretched Drogo out on a woven mat. No, he muttered in the common tongue. No. It was all he said, all he seemed capable of saying. Irri wanted to leave the tent flaps open to let in the breeze, but Dany forbade it. She would not have any see Drogo this way in delirium and weakness. Okay, so this is actually kind of interesting, and it may seem like a minor point, but one of the things that makes Martin's use of magic really good is the atmosphere he builds up towards it, and the kind of almost, I used to call it like plausible deniability of the magic, in that are these characters hallucinating? Are they on a drug trip? Is it everything just kind of panicked right now? Or is it like straight up magic? And so what he's doing here is he's setting up the without leaving the tent flaps open, it's creating this heat and this claustrophobia already in the reader before we even get to the magic part of it, which I think is clever. And it goes to show how important atmosphere can be in making something literally feel a certain way. Arrow stared fearfully at Drogo where he lay. He dies, she whispered. Dany slapped her. The cow cannot die. He is the father of the stallion who mounts the world. His hair has never been cut. He still wears the bells his father gave him. So Dany slapped her. This is actually a really good detail. It's not a good thing for a person to do, but it is a very strong action that tells you something about Dany. And something else I haven't mentioned, because we would have to read through the whole thing and I don't want to waste our time, is there's actually not a ton of inner monologue from Dany this entire time. Martin, for some reason, can get away with not having a lot of interiority in that way. Like all this, for example, no inner feelings on Dany's part, but through her actions and her dialogue and the sense and the atmosphere around it that he creates, we are able to be in Dany's head, even as he's not telling us exactly what's going on in her head. And Lambrick says, and at this point, we know what would mean for Dany if people saw that Drogo is dying. Yeah, exactly. Like, this is not, I mean, I didn't cover it, but like even his who are his like three blood riders, his three main homies, the three main homies, are like, he can't ride. This is not going to go well. This whole Khalasar is going to break apart. Khaleesi, Chikwi said, he fell from his horse. Trembling, her eyes full of sudden tears, Dany turned away from them. He fell from his horse. It was so she had seen it, and the blood riders, and no doubt her handmaidens and the men of her caste as well. And how many more? They could not keep it secret, and Dany knew what that meant. A cow who could not ride, could not rule, and Drogo had fallen from his horse. This is technically restating information, but it works here because, again, this is the first time she's really thinking to herself since the beginning. And it also kind of makes sure that the readers understand, like, this is a problem. The repetition of it makes it so that you know that Dany is kind of focusing on this in a way that's a little bit already beginning to tinge with feverishness. Limbrick says, it's also so interesting that some of Kim Martin's characters have a lot of inner dialogue and it adds to the sense of who they are. Yeah, this is very true. And at what times they'll have it too will change. So Dany, like in her last chapter in A Dance of Dragons, is very internal, if I'm remembering correctly. Whereas here she's like more separate from it a little bit. Okay, so where is Maria's Miraz-Dur? She demanded. They're trying to bathe him, which like is just not gonna work. Well, the bathroom's gonna be now. Jorah shows up and Jorah is like, this is a problem. And he gets, he's like, I'm going to go put on armor, which, like in the heat, it really does not make sense. We'll talk about this in a second. The armor would work. I like this description. Sir Jorah broke the dry mud with his knife, pried the chunks from the flesh, peeled off the leaves one by one. So this is just like a nice description. There's no like similes, but there are some good strong adverbs or adjectives. And there's also a progression. I broke the dry mud, pried the chunks, peeled off the leaves one by one, which also kind of builds tension a little bit and expectation. A foul, sweet smell rose from the wound, so thick it almost choked her. The leaves were crusted with blood and pus, Drogo's breast black and glistening with corruption. No, Dany whispered as the tears ran down her cheeks. No, please, gods hear me, no. So again, we're not in Dany's head. Like, we're not being told Dany was frightened or Dany felt panic whipping through her. It's literally just her dialogue here is strong enough that you immediately feel what she's feeling and understand it. And also, actually, because there's a certain amount of like, you can sense her beginning to, what is the word I'm looking for? It's not disambiguate. It is depersonalized from the situation. Like, this is almost, he doesn't say that this felt distant to her voice, felt distant from herself, but you actually kind of feel that because you feel Dany's emotion, but it's also her actions aren't explained exactly. Jorah is such a defeatist. This book is so much less noble than the show made him. The show, like the actor in the show is just super cool. The other thing is the show is often, I don't want to say written by men, but there's an extent to which the show, well, okay, so maybe it's not the men thing, but the show is just never really willing to, is never willing to show its characters as gray and somewhat pathetic at times or nuanced or bad as Martin is. All the characters get flattened slightly. So Jorah kind of just becomes like the nice defender in the same way that a lot of Tyrion's rough edges and nastiness and like lurking ugliness get sanded away just to make him like the wisecracking dude. And then later in the series, he has nothing to do because they've taken away any of his complexity. The dialogue is strong, but Martin has set up for this. This is the moment where everything we have worked for is slipping away. Yeah, that's one thing I wasn't sure how I was going to handle in this chapter is that a lot of this has been set up beforehand. And so a lot of what works here is the setup. It is that this is the culmination of all of that tension and stuff. But you'll just have to take my word for it. How Drogo thrashed, finding some unseen black blood ran slow and thick from his open wound. Just good descriptions all around. Okay, more creepy stuff. Dany was lost. Go. Oh yeah, and then Jorah is telling her that they should leave, and he's like, let's go down a little bit. Is again there's a cognitive dissonance going on between Dany and Mary here. She went to Drogo burning on his mat and gazed long at his wound. Ask or tell, it makes no matter. He is beyond a healer's skills. The cow's eyes were closed. She opened one with her fingers. He has been dulling the hurt with the milk of the poppy. Yes, Dany admitted. I made him a poultice of fire pot and sting me not and bound it in the lambskin. It burned, he said. He tore it off. The herb woman made him a new one, wet and soothing. That is the funniest thing, I think, is that one, like the Dothraki are big and manly and tough and like warriors. And then like he just didn't like how painful it was, so he took it off, which I like is just a very subtle way of undermining that kind of machismo. I don't mind characters making occasionally objectively dumb choices if it's based on consistent internal logic. Yeah, no, that's very true. But for some reason, there's a thing where readers often, because they relate so much to the character, if the character does something dumb, they often start actually distancing themselves from the character because they feel kind of like they've done something. Oh, okay. The question is, was the poultice good? What do you think, Will? Okay, so this is a big question, is whether Marie Mazdur poisoned Drogo so that this would happen, or if this just happened on its own and it was a happy accident on her part. I think that actually the poultice was good, but she knew Drogo wouldn't keep it on. I actually think she was like, literally, this was her kind of letting him giving him the rope to hang himself. I think she definitely expected Drogo to die, but I think in her case, she kind of just gave them the rope. She knew like, oh, he says he's manly and he's not going to take it off. He's going to take it off and he's going to die because of it. Oh, okay. And then Angry Otter says, an issue is often how characters do dumb things to drive the plot, not because that's normal for them. This is very true. I think that you really, really need to have a good sense of why the character is making a dumb decision for it to feel real. And also, it can't be, like you said, just to drive the plot. Like, if you can tell that the author just needed a plot point to happen so the character did a dumb thing to get you there, the reader sense that as inauthentic and really hate it. Lindbergh says, I think the poultice was good and she knew she'd be blamed if it wasn't. Yeah, that's also a good point. She might have actually, like, known. 1 sec. Okay, make him another poultice, Dany begged. Oops, what happened there? Dany begged, this time I will make certain he wears it. There's a certain patheticness to how she's begging for this. There's a real sense of like panic in what, again, and just what she's saying. We don't really get what we're not being told what Dany is feeling, since basically Dany felt a tightness inside her. Even then, that's just like a bodily thing. We're not told she's scared or anything like that. It's all through this dialogue that's making her character pop, and you get in her head. The time for that is past, my lady, Miri said. All I can do now is ease the dark road before him, so he might ride painless to the Nightlands. He will be gone by morning. So one of the things is I kind of really love the way Martin writes like faux medievalisms. So he might ride painless to the Nightlands. This actually gives a lot of sense of the culture and gives you a sense that this isn't just Fantasylandia. He's really making a strength out of it being a fantasy. Like we just read Fourth Wing. You guys all know how painful that was. And one of the things about that is they say for the win at several points. There's absolutely no attempt to make it feel like its own world and to use the advantages of fantasy and a fantasy mindset and language to enhance the story. So, it would be like, all I can now do is ease the dark road. All I can do now is let him die. That just is not as powerful as the dark road before him, so we might ride painless to the Nightlands. There's also a little bit of a mockingness, I think, to this in terms of she's mocking the fact that he's like a horse rider, and that's a big thing to the Dothraki. Do not speak its name. Really what I should have done is I should have looked at some of the dragon chapters as a contrast to how Fourth Wing did it. Too late now. Maybe next time. Her words were a knife through Dany's breast. When What had she ever done to make the gods so cruel? She had finally found a place that finally tasted hope and love. She was finally going home, and now to lose it all. Okay, so we have a bodily feeling of what this is like. And notice that this does not actually tell you the abstract emotion. You just feel it because you're, okay, like, okay, this is what a knife through my boob would feel like. I know breast is chest. I'm kidding. Whatever she had done that makes the gods so cruel. And then this is her self-talk. Self-talk is actually usually much better. And it's also focused on like, she was finally going home and now to lose it all. This also sets up the stakes of what all of this means for her in this moment. No, she pleaded, save them and I will free you. I swear it. You must know a way, some magic, some. Yeah. So again, I swear, save him and I will free you. She just does not get what is going on here. Morally, she has kind of viewed the Dothraki as like, a little, she's viewed them a little bit as like boys will be boys almost, because they are really the only source of strength she's ever had in her life. Viserys before this had kept her so helpless, and she had felt helpless, and now with the Dothraki, she is a person, and she had also like really taken on their culture as her own, and all of that is crumbling in this moment. Her only strength in the Dothraki is crumbling, and really the only solidity she's ever really had in her life. One of the things that's kind of fucked up is in later books, Dany still really misses Drogo, and still thinks of him as a very solid thing. And like, Drogo was a really bad dude who R-worded her a lot, and it's kind of, I think at some point in the books, she's going to have to come to terms with the fact that he was just like not a good dude. But she still, even in book 4, is not at a point where she can really process that. Yeah, the issue with a lot of fantasy beliefs is that authors only set up the basics, the gods and their names, but forget the rights and beliefs attached to them. Yes, and more than anything, the mindset of not quite understanding the world or things being the will of a god. Like, that's one of the things that's going to make the magic here work, is that the sense that like maybe there are things in the world you don't really know or understand, is much more, I think, something that medieval people would have. Though who knows? Because maybe in 200 years, people are going to be like, man, those idiots, they didn't know anything. But I mean, there's a qualitative difference even between generations. Like in my mother's generation, you couldn't just Google things. Now, if you want information, you can just Google it. Like there's an access to information that is completely unprecedented in our generation, even to ones before us. I sometimes go easy on older fantasy authors who wrote in a before time in terms of accuracy, because like if you wanted to write Rome accurately, you needed to get books from the library that you might have to order to figure out all these minor things. Whereas now you can just Google like how's the correct way to do Latin names. I just can't get past how long these books in the series are. It makes me scared to read them. Yeah, no, totally fair. That's one of the reasons I don't actually recommend them to people when they're like, what books should I read? They're too long. I think the books are good. I think book 3, and I think after book 3, the books kind of fall apart in terms of structure. The chapters themselves are good, but the series as a whole, I kind of feel like loses structure. But yeah, they're really long. And if you're just not into them, you're not into them. Limbrick says, honestly, Drogo is her first personal attachment. Even if it's a traumatic attachment, it's possible to love someone who abuses you. Yeah, exactly. And I think it, honestly, again, I think it makes sense for Dany. Dany is almost constantly in a state of, not panic, but she just has not really been able to think and theorize about things. She's been under stress pretty much ever from her childhood to the end of A Dance with Dragons. Like her being like, starving in the wastes with the dragon is probably the most time she's had to sit and think to herself. That would actually be a really good chapter to go over. I also want to go over the last Bran chapter in A Dance with Dragons, because that is such a creepy chapter. Okay, but Mirri Maz Duur sat back on her heels and studied Daenerys through eyes as black as night. So another thing here is that one of the reasons Martin gets away with black as night is that it is not super cliche. It is just somewhat cliche, but it doesn't really pop. But also because of everything he's done around it, it's not really a problem. So one of the things I want to talk about is that, and I think I've said this before and I'll probably end up saying it again, but when a book has too many problems, it actually creates a cascade failure. So if it had 2 problems, like if there are 10 elements of a book, let's say, and 2 of them are a problem, well, that doesn't affect the other 8. Yes. Don't trust me with math. 8 in there. But if there are like 4 problems, then it creates like a dominoes or a cascade failure where all of the other things all of a sudden become less strong. And so if you have built like a really strong map and there's one weak point in it, that doesn't really affect the other parts of the map. Whereas if you only have one strong point in a weak map, that can actually make the whole map worse because now you're understanding it. It is getting really dark in here, but unfortunately I need my mouse. So everyone's just going to have to deal. One of the light bulbs went out. Hey, Max, you're viewer number 4. Okay, back to the book. There is a spell. Her voice was quiet, scarcely more than a whisper. But it is hard, my lady, and dark. Some will say that death is cleaner. I learned the way in Ashai and paid dear for the lessons. My teacher was a blood mage from the Shadowlands. Dany went cold all over. Then you truly are a magi. Am I? Maria Master smiled. Only a magi can save your writer now, Silver Lady. I love Maria is such a badass. She's such a vamp. I love it. I love that she's just like, it's funny because the first time I read it, I felt I felt very much with Dany where I was like, man, fuck that lady. But also at the same time, I was like, well, she's making a good point. Now I just love how much she's taunting Dany. Because before she had been like, oh, in the previous chapter, she'd been like, oh no, I'm not a blood mage. That's not a thing. And now she's like, yeah, I am. And you need me, bitch. I don't mind the length of the books, but I can't in good faith recommend unfinished series to other people. That's fair. Some people really do just like unfinished things. Lindbergh says, and so with the eyes black as night, it's the first time we get that description in the book. I'm 99% sure. Yes, I read these too often. In that instance, it adds to the mood in the scene. Yeah, that actually is a good point. He may not have used it before, and so it's fine to use. And again, it's not annoying. It's not a dark and stormy night. It's not like as your eyes. It's like it's not even a cliche. It's just kind of ordinary is really how I would put it. And I think that's one of the things about Martin's prose. I think the other thing to realize with Martin is that his prose are good if you understand that the series is like 90,000. I was going to say words, but that's actually not even true. They're like 1 million words long. And so like he kind of has to, like, coming up with new descriptions all the time is really difficult for books that length. That's why certain chapters are really lyrical and like the similes are really pretty and the descriptions are really pretty. And then other ones are kind of meh. Her eyes could have been gold flecked on. Oh God. Let's see then. Okay. Is there no other way? No other. Khal Drogo gave a shuddering grasp. Do it, Dany blurted. She must not be afraid. She was the blood of the dragon. Save him. Okay, so this then ties into another thing that Martin does a ton, which I've talked about, are like arc words or reoccurring words. She must not be afraid. She was the blood of the dragon. This is one of the ways that Dany is going to bolster her identity is through this refrain. It's the same refrains that like other characters will have. I'm blanking. You know nothing. Jon Snow is one that constantly comes up. Bastard something something also Jon Snow has. So notice also this big decision she's making, which is terrible because it's been set up through the atmosphere of the scene. This is an understandable decision to make. She needs Drogo to live, even if she's going to be making this terrible choice. There's a price, the God's wife warned her. You'll have gold, horses, whatever you like. It is not a matter of gold or horses. This is blood magic, lady. Only death may pay for life. Death? Dany wrapped her arms around herself protectively, rocked back and forth on her heels. My death, she told herself that she would die for him if she must. She was the blood of the dragon. She would not be afraid. Her brother Rhaegar had died for the woman he loved. No, Marasmer promised. Not your death, Khaleesi. Dany trembled with life. Do it. So, okay, so we just see this. She just said blood of the dragon and then blood of the dragon. So one of the things that happens to people is when they're under a lot of stress, their identity will become brittle. And often people will try to reach back to legitimize themselves through an identity, like through their, people don't do this as much, but with like family, for example, or their role in a, Jon does this with like, he's a man of the Night's Watch, and that means something to him. And so it's putting like psychic weight on this idea. She is the blood of the dragon. Being a Targaryen means something for her. She even references her brother, who she didn't even really know. It all comes back to Arius. Winter is coming. A Lannister always pays his debts. Exactly. Like, those are things that really define these characters. And through it's not called a shibboleth. Let me look it up because it might be called a shibboleth. No, that is not exactly what a shibboleth is. It is sort of a shorthand that the author can use anytime they want to bring. Martin uses anytime he wants to bring a bunch of abstract ideas together. Is blood of the dragon. You know what that means. You don't have to re-explain it each time, and it doesn't feel overly telling. And in this case, the repetition of it is she's panicked. Like you can feel that. Also, I love that Miri is like, and one of the things great about Marie is that she doesn't like lie to Dany at any point. She's like, this is blood magic. Death can pay for life. There is a price. You're not gonna like it. All this stuff. No, Dany promised not your death. This is that classic, like, you forgot to ask the elves the right question or use legalese. The Magi nodded solemnly. As you speak, so it shall be done. Call your servants. Bring his horse, Mary Mazdur commanded, and so it was done. Jogo led the great red stallion into the tent. When the animal caught the scent of death, it screamed and reared, rolling his eyes. It took 3 men to subdue him. This is such a minor thing, but like it really gives you a sense that like there is something going wrong here. Already you can feel like this acceleration of all this terrible stuff. It's narrowing in and it's getting worse faster. What is dead may never die. That's a good one. Let's see. What do you mean to do? Dany asked. We need the blood. This is the way. Then one of Jogo, he fell to your knees before Khaleesi. He pleaded, "You must not do this thing. Let me kill this Magi. Kill her, and you will kill your cow." Dany said, "This is bloodmagic." He said, "It is forbidden." I am Khaleesi, and I say it is not forbidden. And Kveas Dothrak Kal Drogo slew a stallion and ate his heart to give our son strength and courage. This is the same. Again, we're ramping up the cost. The Dothraki think this is terrible. And also, I love immediately her just like how she immediately thinks about this differently. What is it's cognitive dissonance, I think, is the term I'm looking for. And also, just the ways you justify things to yourself you even know are a bad idea. The stallion kicked and reared as Reiko, Quoro, and Ago pulled him to the tub where the cow floated like one already dead. Pus and blood seeping from his wounds to stain the bathwaters. Such a good description. Miriam Asger chanted words in a tongue that Dany did not know, and a knife appeared in her hand. Dany never saw where it came from. It looked old, hammered red bonds, leaf-shaped, its blade covered with ancient glyphs. The Magi drew it across the stallion's throat, under the noble head. I don't love noble head here, but... And the horse screamed and shuddered as the blood poured out of him in a red rush. He would have collapsed, but the men of her cause held him up. Strength of the mount, go into the rider, Miri sang as horse blood swirled into the waters of Drogo's bath. Strength of the beast, go into the man. Very creepy. Jogo looked terrified as he struggled with the stallion's weight, afraid to touch the dead flesh, yet afraid to let go as well. Only a horse, Dany thought. If she could buy Drogo's life with the death of a horse, she would pay 1,000 times over. Okay, so again, we see this like Dany immediately doing a certain amount of cognitive dissonance. She knows it's not the horse's life. Like she knows it's not going to be the horse's death that costs it. From what Marie Mazdur said up here, I don't know if she said it explicitly, but it was pretty clear. Yeah, this is not a matter of gold or horses. She already said that, but Dany is like, okay, no, it's just the horse. That's fine, and it's clearly not. But I love that kind of that frantic mind state and the ability to reader and character know different things. You can hear she's trying to talk herself into it through repetition. Used sparingly, repetition can be so useful. It really can, but you really have to know. Like one of the things people hated in Feast for Crows was that apparently Martin had discovered the word nuncle, which is like an abbreviation of mine uncle, and he used it all over the place, and everyone hated it. I like how Martin's descriptions are poignant and specific. My goal writing is not the amount of words, but the right words, short and sweet, put to the point. Yeah, very much so. Again, there's there's been a few okay similes here, but like mostly it's just really strong descriptions, and it's building the atmosphere of what's going on. And it's just very clear. You get very clear images and feelings from it. When the stallion fell, the bath was dark red and nothing showed of Drogo but his face. Again, that's just a really good description. And also the way that he does it, and nothing showed of Drogo but his face. That could have been phrased worse. This could have been phrased like I'm not thinking of a good way of rephrasing right now. It's worse. But Martin does this thing where often he'll have passive information be active. So this is technically a passive phase. Nothing showed of Drogo but his face, but it feels active because it's like you're seeing a different part of the scene. I talked about this a little bit in Varamir. When they let the stallion fall, the bath was a dark red and nothing showed of Drogo but his face. Actually, I did talk about this. He has a thing happen, a description, like an adjective to just show the scene, and then a consequence of it that is technically in passive voice but feels active because it feels like you're understanding it. It's funny. He does that a lot. Marie Mazdur had no use for the carcass. Burn it, Dany told them. It was what they did, she knew. When a man died, his mount was killed and placed beneath him on the funeral, blah, blah, blah. Braziers were lit. Mary Mazdur tossed a red powder onto the coals. It gave the smoke a spicy scent, a pleasant enough smell. Erui fled sobbing, and Dany was filled with fear. But she had gone too far back to turn back now. She sent her handmaidens away. Go with them, Silver Lady, Marasmer told her. So this is another part of that plausible deniability magic, is that, hey, maybe the spicy scent, a pleasant enough smell, is some kind of a drug. Like, you as the reader know that, but Dany might not. And so you're like, okay, maybe if she starts hallucinating a little bit, that's what's happening. SMJ is an abuser of repetition. Well, her problem is that she wrote books as long as as Martin, but they're like filled with even more cliches. And only the pale oval of Drogo's face floated above the water. Yeah, that's a good example of that. Like, you don't need that pale oval, just doesn't feel like it would fit there. Even though sometimes Martin does do that, and it works to varying degrees. The absence of information gives more information of the scene, if that makes sense. Very much so. Yeah, it's that whole the monster is scariest when you can't really see it thing. And that's actually, like, again, on a prose portion. Like, so Marie Mazdur had no use for the carcass. This I noticed because sometimes Martin will do this where it's abstract. This is like, clearly there was some kind of an information exchange or dialogue here, but he just skips it because it's not super important. And again, because he's done all the work in setting up the scene, he can get away with using this every once in a while to actually make the scene go faster. I will stay, Dany said. The man took me under the stars and gave life to the child inside me. I will not leave him. You must. Once I begin to sing, no one must enter the tent. My song will wake powers old and dark. The dead will dance here this night. No living man must look on them. It's so creepy and cool. And again, the monster is in the tent. You can't quite see the monster, so you don't quite know what's going on. So that goes back to what we were just talking about. And there's a certain, again, plausible deniability. You can't quite see them. Also, once I begin to sing, no one must enter the tent. That is going to become important in a minute, as you guys will see. Dany bowed her head. Helpless, no one will enter. She bent over the tub over Drogo in his bath of blood and kissed him lightly on the brow. Bath of blood is a very cool. So again, this is something Martin does with language every once in a while, which is nice, is that he will, how would I describe this? Let me get something to drink first. Okay, so sometimes he will describe things in a very elemental way, or in a way that's like a little pithy. Yeah. He'll describe something in a way that it's like a little pithy, like, okay, so this is not from writing, but I remember at one point in Mad Men, one of the characters, they were doing like, I don't know, some kind of a lipstick test or whatever. And so the women would like bite or kiss or whatever they do to like paper. This is how they did it. And then threw it away. And then one of the other, people later in the scene took up the basket and gave it to somebody else and said, here's your box of kisses. He does that in his language a lot. He'll kind of make something, he'll describe it in a way that's, again, a little pithy. I'm not quite sure what the word is. If you guys in the comments know, let me know. Engagement. Okay. Outside, the sun was low on the horizon, the sky a bruised red. The Khalasar had made camp. Tents and mats were scattered as far as I could see. A hot wind blew. Again, we actually have the heat. A crowd had gathered to stare at Dany with hard black eyes, their faces like masks of beaten copper. She saw Sir Jorah Mormont wearing mail leather now, sweat beating on his broad, balding head. He pushed his way through the Dothraki to Dany. When he saw the scarlet footprints her boots had left on the ground, the color seemed to drain from his face. What have you done, little fool? He asked hoarsely. I had to save him. We could have fled, he said. I would have seen you safe to Ashai. Princess, there was no need. Again, he's like, oh shit, this is such a bad idea. There's such great mounting horror. Again, the horror is not just visual, or it's not just this isn't just like a visual horror or horror of what's happening. There's a psychological horror to it, and that like Dany is making a bad decision here, and her impact is a mental one. I'm going to try to change how I'm doing this, the frame of this. Hold on. Okay, here we go. So now we can see a little bit more of the screen. Am I truly your princess? She asked him. You know you are. God save us both. Then help me now. Jorah grimaced. Would that I knew how. Rasmer's voice rose to a high, ululating wail that sent a shiver down Dany's back. Some of the Dothraki began to mutter and back away. The tent was aglow with the light of braziers within. Through the blood-spattered sand silk, she glimpsed shadows moving. Miri Mazdur was dancing, and not alone. Such a creepy line. Um, again, that's one of these things where like he kind of steps back and lets you have the information that's creepy. Instead of like just telling you, like just the knowledge of what's going on is creepy. He doesn't need to tell you that it's creepy. Hold on, I'm changing this again. One sec. I want you guys to be able to see as much as my lovely face as possible. I'm kidding. Dany saw naked fear on the faces of the Dothraki. This must not be, Quotho thundered. She had not seen the Blood Riders return, Hago and Colt with them. They had brought the Hailsmen, the eunuchs who healed with knife and needle and fire. Oh, look, here it is again. Rule of threes, knife and needle and fire. Specifics, easy to picture, 3 of them. This will be, Dany replied. Again, this is something where the like faux medieval language, I think he's using well, in that he, this will be, Dany replied. And then I think it makes the scene stronger instead of just saying like, no, I'm going to do it. Like that just, this will be, like she intones it almost. Oh yeah, Megai. Hago growled, an old Kolo. Kolo who had bound his life to Drogo's on the day of his birth. Kolo who had always been kind to her. Kolo spat full in her face. This again, very strong action to show that she is just breaking, this is not a good idea. She is breaking, it really sells the breaking of the Dothraki taboos here. In a way that's really cool. Or not in a way that really shows what's going on. Let's see. You will die, Magic, quote the brother, but the others must die first. He drew his Arakar made for the tent. No, she shouted, you mustn't. So we're reinforcing now the idea that no one can go into the tent, which again will be funny in a minute. I'm gonna hurry through this, I think, a little bit because I wanted to get to the next chapter after this. And also my brain is beginning to fuzz up a little bit. Jorah starts to fight with Quotho or Quaro. No, with Quotho, which there's this thing that happens in the book where like they never understand how good plate armor, like European plate armor is. Like there's no way that it mentions here that like the knight was clad in chainmail with gauntlets and greaves of lobster steel and heavy gorget around his throat, but he had not thought to don his helm. Like there's really no way. Later something is going to crunch against Jorah's like hip and cut through the chainmail, but you can't cut through chainmail. You can kind of pierce it with arrows or a spear maybe, but you just cannot cut through chainmail. And so like there's really no like way that the Dothraki would have any chance. Yeah, see, the left side of the man's face ran and a cut to the hip opened a gash in his mail. No, what would actually happen is the impact would bruise and that would hurt, but there's no way it would actually cut. Hey, Maggie. Welcome to being number 5. Okay, there's a fight scene. It's pretty good. Okay, and then we get the Dothraki was shouting, Marasmir wailing in the tent like nothing human, pleading for water as he died. So again, rule of threes here, but also we get the soundscape and it creates this sense of claustrophobia and mounting horror, shouting, wailing, and then pleading. And she probably shouldn't technically be able to hear him pleading, but maybe he's doing so loudly. But either way, it adds to the horror of the scene. Dany cried out for help, but no one heard. Rako was fighting Hago, Arak dancing with Arak, until Jogo's whip cracked, loud as thunder, the lash coiling around, whatever. Someone threw a stone, and when Dany looked, her shoulder was torn and bloody. No, she wept. No, please, stop it. It's too high. The price is too high. Again, no actual interiority here in terms of what she is thinking, but you feel what she's thinking through her dialogue and what's happening around her. Again, the best kind of writing is when you can describe what's happening and you don't actually need to describe what's going on inside the character. The reader and the character are on the same page, but that's difficult to do. And also, or this is the classic horror thing of like, oh no, I screwed up. And so there's that kind of feeling going on. More stones came flying. She tried to call to the tent, but Kolo caught her fingers in her hair. He pulled her back head and she felt the cold touch of his knife at her throat. My baby, she screamed, and perhaps the gods heard. For as quick as that, he was dead. And then everyone is dispersing. The sun had set, fires burned throughout the Khazar, great orange blazes that crackled the fiery. So that's part of the thing, is that to give this magic weight, it's not just whatever magic thing is happening, it's the scene as a whole around the magic. If everyone was chill and this was happening in the tent, it would not be as creepy. It is creepy because of the impact it's having on the rest of the world, even if technically speaking cause and effect isn't going on there. Well, actually it is though. there's a cultural weight to the magic, and the cultural weight is physically manifesting in the Khazar falling apart. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's the thing that gives the magic a lot of weight. Yeah, I know. I think that makes sense. That makes sense, guys. Angry Otter says, so she's doing scary magic just to avoid being closer. I guess that does sound extreme, but it's probably do it too. Okay, so the thing about it is that it's not just that she'll have to be an old lady, but like also she's afraid about her child. Also, she lived a lot of her life under the thumb of a physically abusive brother, and so she probably thinks of that. She doesn't think like, hey, I'm gonna be able to kick it with a whole bunch of old ladies. Undercover nun, back in the habit. What is that called? I don't know, the Whoopi Goldberg movie. Anyway, she doesn't think she's just going to chill in a mountain. She like probably associates it a lot with the abuse she went through as a child, and so she does not want. And also, she really loves Drogo. She does. He's abusive and a horrible person, but she loves him. And again, he is her only link to any kind of agency she's ever had. For me, the magic is given weight because for the most part, it's treated as though it doesn't exist. We don't know what the cost or outcome is. Yeah, that's true. That too. That as well. There's that sister act. There we go. Yes. Yeah, we don't quite know what's going on. Again, there's a mysticalness to it and a horror to it and an unknownness. She tried to rise in the agony, seized her and squeezed like a giant's fist. Very nice simile. Seized her and screamed. Again, though, when he's giving things, he doesn't talk about abstracts. He talks about what her body feels like. The breath went out of her. It was all she could do to gasp. The sound of Maria's voice was like a funeral dirge. Inside the tent, the shadows whirled. So that's the other thing is we talked earlier about repetition. So he's not. Martin isn't using exactly the same language, but again, we have like this almost annoyingness to Miraz's voice. Like it's a noise in this distance that won't go away, and the shadows are whirling, which is a just reminding us of it. An arm went under her waist, and then Jorah was lifting her to his feet. His face was sticky with blood, and Dany saw that half his ear was gone. She convulsed in his arms as the pain took her again, and heard the knight shouting for the handmaids to help him. Are they also afraid? She knew the answer. Another pain grasped her, and Dany bit back a scream. It felt as if her son had a knife in each hand, as if he were hacking at her to cut his way out. This is not the best simile, but it's very effective. I mean, like, okay, so it's not the prettiest simile, but it is a very effective one. And it has like that's the other thing is it's a very clear image. Martin is really good at doing that in a way that not everyone is. Doria, curse you, Sir Jorah roared. Come here, fetch the birthing woman. They will not come. They say she is accursed. They'll come or I'll have their heads. Doria wept. They are gone, my lord. The Magi, someone else said. Was that Algo? Take her to the Magi. No, Dany wanted to say. No, you mustn't. Not that. But when she opened her mouth, a long wail of pain escaped and the sweat broke over her skin. What was wrong with them? Couldn't they see? Inside the tent, the shapes were dancing, circling the brazier and the bloody bath, dark against the sand silk, and some did not look human. She glimpsed the shadow of a great wolf and another like a man wreathed in flames. The lamb women know the secrets of the birthing bed, Eerie says. She said so, I heard her. Yes, Doria agreed, I heard her too. No, she shouted, or perhaps she only thought it, for no whisper of sound escaped her lips. She was being carried, her eyes opened to gaze up at the flat, dead sky, black and bleak and starless. Please, no. The sound of Marie Maz's voice grew louder until it filled the world. The shapes, she screamed, the dancers. Sir Jorah carried her inside the tent. God, that is such a great ending to this chapter. Let's see, let me take a look at the comments real quick. Metal, right? Ah, man. When he does, Martin is a short story horror writer. And when he's able to do that in the book, he is at his best. But now I have to say some kind of like analysis. I'm actually a little bit worried that this is just going to turn into me just fanboying about this book a lot. But actually we should think of this as, archaeology. I'm just trying to analyze the chapter and figure out things that work well from it. So many times I've wondered what those shapes are because I'm not actually good at figuring things like that out. Okay, I was wondering that too. I think a little bit more description of like how creepy and weird looking they would be nice. One of the things that me and Katie talked about in a book you guys haven't seen yet called House of Salt and Sorrow, which is not actually a good book, but the author can do creepy images really well. Like at one point she's just describing a slaughtered great turtle that looks like it's in agony and its eyes flicker like it's alive, so the character goes up but then the eyes open and maggots fall out in like a pale rain, something like that. A little bit more of a suggestion of what you're seeing, but the whole point is that you can't really see it. So what I like here, she shouted, or perhaps she thought it. Again, there's a real sense of the ambiguity of her perspective. She doesn't quite know what's going on, and that makes the magic, again, a little more plausibly deniable in the world. Her mental state is not at its best. And there's also a helplessness to it. That's the other thing, is she can't do anything about this. She knows that this is a bad idea, that this is going to be a horrible thing, and that this is, a blood magic tent of her own making, so to speak. But now she's got to give birth in it. Just good visuals all around. The bloody bath, dark against the sand, silk on some did not look human. And then that final wham line of just stepping back and telling you what happened. Again, Martin handles distance really well in these books. Okay, and so then this is the next chapter. I wanted to get through all three, but I think I'm probably only going to get to two. The chapters actually each keep getting longer, funnily enough, and I don't know quite why. The other thing is, her birthing the dragons is pretty well known by this point, so we don't necessarily... it's also kind of a betrayal from Jorah. He lets his feelings for Dany decide his actions, not her will. Yeah, it's very in character for Jorah. And that's the other thing, is one of the things that makes it feel horrific is that the characters aren't the best people. That's the thing about horror, is you almost have to have your characters be a little complicit, because what you're trying to portray is a worldview that's a little depressing. Not too depressing. That's one thing I think horror movies often have trouble with, is they'll just randomly have something super depressing happen at the end of the movie after the heroes escape. But you want some of that. You want some of that patheticness, some of that human ugliness and human lack of valor in there, and that will give you a sense of discomfort and vulnerability, which you want from horror. I think I've watched a lot of horror movies. Wings shadowed her fever dreams. You don't want to wake the dragon, do you? So already here we're going to have a repetition of this question. One here, one here, one here. We have the same, don't wake the dragons to you, which becomes an imperative. That is one thing I did realize from that chapter by chapter thing. She was walking down a long hall beneath high stone arches. She could not look behind her, must not look behind her. There was a door ahead of her, tiny with distance, but even from afar, she saw that it was painted red. She walked faster, and her bare feet left bloody footprints on the stone. You don't want to wake the dragon, do you? She saw sunlight on the Dothraki Sea, the living plain, rich with the smells of earth and death. Wind stirred the grasses, and they rippled like water. Drogo held her in strong arms, and his hands stroked her sex, and opened her and woke that sweet okay, we're just going to skip that part because I find it gross. And the stars smiled down on them. Stars in a daylight sky. Home, she whispered as he entered her and filled. Okay, all right, there's some sex stuff going on. I don't really want to... Ser Jorah's face was drawn and sorrowful. Rhaegar was the last dragon, he told her. He warmed translucent hands over a glowing brazier where stone eggs smoldered red as coals. One moment he was there, and the next he was fading, his flesh colorless, less substantial than wind. The last dragon, he whispered, thin as wisp, and was gone. She felt the dark behind her, and the red door seemed farther away than ever. So what he's good at doing is, it's what Viserys used to say to Dany to warn her against angering him. Yeah, exactly. Jorah is such a person, such a thirsty older man who's still got some good in him. That is a great description of him. The thing about Jorah is that, Jorah is a very flawed person who is very lonely in a way and wants to go home, and he can't. And so he glomps onto Dany a little strong. Again, I think the book takes a very kind of he's not a great person, but he's not a terrible person view of him, whereas the show really wants to recapture that nobleness, partly because the actor is just so cool looking. Right. Okay. So one of the things he does is that he is very good with solid descriptions. Warm, translucent hands over a glowing brazier where stone eggs smoldered red as coals. Easy to picture. But also the other thing about this is that there is a strong sense of the dream logic of she's not really in control of what's happening. Things are flowing in and out in front of her. A lot of the dream sequences we've read, I can't think of one right now, but just have not been this good. I'm trying to think if Fourth Wing had some, but I don't think it did. Otherwise, I would love to rag on it some more. Oh, and then there's actually more. Want to wake the dragon. Don't want to wake the dragon here. Viserys stood before screaming, the dragon does not beg, Slate, you do not command the dragon, I am the dragon, I will be crowned. The molten gold trickled down his face like wax, burning deep channels in his flesh. I am the dragon and I will be crowned, he shrieked, and his fingers snapped like snakes, biting at her nipples, pinching, twisting, even as his eyes burst and ran like jelly down seared and blackened cheeks. Again, Martin has this thing with nipples. And I remember that this is a thing I think Viserys actually did in real life, which is why she's remembering it here. But like, can we not talk about nipples so much? Finger snap like snakes. I actually don't like this description. I don't really know what that means. Snakes don't like. I guess okay, all right. For some reason, I thought it was like their body snapping, but I guess it's like snapping like their jaws. But to me, it just didn't. I didn't pick that up. I had to think about it for a minute. Even as his eyes burst and ran like jelly down seared and blackened cheeks. That's nice. That's nice. Out foul jelly, as Shakespeare would say. Song of Nips and Fire. Oh God, you have no idea. Let's see. She could feel the heat inside her, a terrible burning in her womb. Her son was tall and proud, with Drogo's copper skin and her brown silver hair, violet eyes shaped like almonds, and he smiled for her and began to lift his hands towards hers, but when he opened his mouth, the fire poured out. She saw his heart burning through his chest, and in an instant he was gone, consumed like a moth by a candle, turned to ash. She wept for her child, the promise of a sweet mouth on her breast, but her tears turned to streams as they touched her skin. Her tears turned to steam. Yeah, it's creepy. It's really nice. I all these visions... My dog's scratching at the door. 1 second. Okay, I'm back. My dog decided to join us. So, of course, we need the dog cam. Oh, damn it. I'm so bad at this. Hold on. There he is. Oh, hey, puppy. Yeah, Maria's cats get a lot of attention, but my dog is super cute. Let's see. Very good dog, yes. Potato. He's very funny. He's like very like, why aren't you letting me sit next to you? I don't get it. Oh, all right, I'm gonna take a minute break just to recharge. Let's see. Martin could do more with the description because it is a dream where reality needs to be grounded. Yeah, but it's also in the choosing of phrases very clear imagery. Yes, so it's actually both. One of the things, again, Martin does very well is that kind of like, here, hold on, let me go back. I said I just said I was going to take a break and I'm not. YOLO. Okay, so the promise was, but her tears turned to steam as they touched her skin. Yeah, so that's like a thing that's not going to happen in real life, though. I think it's kind of a foreshadowing of what's going to happen in the last chapter when she goes into the fire, if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, no, that's not really a thing that happens in real life. But sometimes he will use that kind of language in the books when it's like you could describe something, like going back to that like basket of kisses thing I was talking about. Like he will sometimes use descriptions like that. And that's one of the things I think does help bridge into the more magical, impossible things, is that you still kind of understand the language going in, like you've been trained on it a little bit, maybe. This is a good scene, but I'm going to skip the rest of it. Also becomes want to wake the dragon. The dragon. I don't know how he comes up with so much weird imagery. A great knife of pain ripped down her back, and she felt her skin tear open and smelled the stench of burning blood and saw the shadow of wings. Again, like it's funny because like a lot of his descriptions are like, "Hey, that's a heavy metal band cover." Actually, this is actually interesting. She's like flying over things in her dream, and it's actually very similar to Bran, who had to learn to fly or fall. After that, for a long time, there was only the pain, the fire within her, and the whispering of stars. So. Here's the thing. Usually I would not love this, right? There was only the pain, abstract, the fire within her, I guess, and the whispering of stars, somewhat flowery. But it really works here because we just had like 3 pages of build up to this line here. And it feels very epic, and you feel like, oh, there's a silence in you at this moment. And again, when the character and you feel something, it's very similar. Okay, hold on. I got to do my dog again because he's looking really cute. Oh, look at him. I always love how he's like, what are you looking at? I'm just sleeping. I'm just a little tired dog. Sorry, Lindbergh. Sorry to make you miss lunch. At least this isn't Fourth Wing where you're going to like vomit if you eat while listening to this. Okay, let's see. Let's go back to here. Okay, so she wakes up. She woke to the taste of ashes. No, she moaned, no, please. The tent was drenched in shadows, still and close. Flakes of ash drifted upward from her brazier, and Dany followed them with her eyes through the smoke hole above. Flying, she thought. I had wings. I was flying, but it was only a dream. Her voice was raw as a wound, and she would not think what she wanted. Ooh, raw as a wound. That is a nice simile there. Simple but effective. What did she hurt so much? It was also her body had been torn to pieces and made from the scraps. I want yes, Khaleesi. So Dany is very confused. They found her on the carpet crawling toward her dragon eggs, which is foreshadowing for next chapter, but also gives you a sense that Dany is kind of out of it. So the thing about all of this is all basically the falling action and impact of what that magic did to her. And so that's one of the things that gives the magic weight, is that we don't just have a thing happen. It happens, and then it both had a building up to that point and then a falling action from that point in terms of the consequences. And that's really what this chapter is the consequences of that decision. And I think, again, that's one of the things that gives it weight. One of the things that there was a video by a guy who was called Every Frame of Painting. He used to do video essays on cinematography. One of the things he talked about is you have to give enough time for an audience to feel what you want them to feel. So he gave the example of, for failure, he gave an example of one scene from Ant-Man where he tries to control a wasp for about 7 to 8 seconds. He can't do it. And then he's like annoyed for another 3 seconds. And the whole thing only takes about 15 to 20 seconds. And then he gave the example of the X-Wing in The Empire Strikes Back, where Luke is trying to lift it from the swamp. And, it takes him, he's trying to do it for like a good 30 seconds, and then he can't do it. And then there's the impact of it. And then Yoda does it. And like, there's so much more temporal space to really feel and sell the idea that the character is trying to do something and what the feeling of that is. And so if you just have magic happen, it's not powerful. Magic only happens in the books in really emotional moments, and it has a big impact on everyone, and it's built up to, and there's falling action from it. I want to skip to the part where it's also worth thinking about that she doesn't think about her kid at all. She's just thinking about the eggs because a part of her knows that her kid's gone. This really goes on for a while. She told Maisie, I want Ser Jorah, she said, and a warm bath, and Miriam Azdur, and memory came back to her all at once, and she faltered. Khal Drogo, she forced herself to say, watching their faces through dread, is he? The Khal lives, Irri answered quietly, yet Dany saw darkness in her eyes when she said the words, and no sooner had she spoken than she rushed to fetch water. She turned to Doria? Tell me. I shall bring Ser Jorah, the Lycian girl said, bowing her head and fleeing the tent. Jigri would have run as well, but Dany caught her by the wrist and held her captive. What is it? I must know. By the way, notice rule of thirds. First girl won't tell her. Second girl won't tell her. Third girl, she has to get, she's forcing her to tell her. What is it? I must know. Drogo and my child. Why had she not remembered the child until now? My son, Rhaego. So this is actually an important sentence here. And again, I think it's supposed to be italicized, but I didn't do it because it's a transition and it's an acknowledgement that before this she didn't. In other books we've read, often characters will do a weird thing and then just not even notice. If you have a character notice that they did a weird thing, often that will just help the reader realize that it's part of the world and not just a bad writing. It's hang a lampshade on it in terms of tropes. Her handmaid closed her eyes. The boy, he did not leave Khaleesi. Her voice was a frightened whisper. Dany released her wrist. My son is dead, she thought, as Jikui left the tent. She had known somehow. She had known since she woke the first time to Jikui's tears. No, she had known before she woke. Her dream had come back to her, sudden and vivid, and she remembered the tall man with the copper skin and long gold braid bursting into flame. Contrast between her kind of conscious and unconscious self, which links the magic to the unconscious, which is kind of creepy. She would weep, she knew, yet her eyes were dry as ash. She should weep. She had wept in her dreams, and the tears had turned to steam on her cheeks. All the grief she had burned out of me, she told herself. She felt sad, and yet she could feel Rhaego receding from her, as if he had never been. This is, again, as much as I talk about how Martin doesn't really do interior dialogue a ton in these chapters, she, all the grief had been burned out of me, she told herself. She felt sad, and yet she could feel Rhaego receding from her as if he had never been. That's actually a good description of what's going on inside of her, and it rings true. Firehead grief had been burned out of me. Again, that's like a very physical body-centered description, which helps you feel it. Ser Jorah and Miriam Azdur entered a few moments later and found Dany. It seemed to okay, blah, blah, blah. She took his hand and placed it on the black eggs with scarlet swirls. What do you feel? Shell, hard as rock the night, was wary. Scales. Heat? No, cold stone. Princess, are you well? Should you be up because you are? Okay, so this is again just kind of like there's something has been awoken in her after that birthing. And this is like a nice way of showing that she's a little out of sync with reality. And this only really works because you're not as in her head as I talked about earlier. If you were super in her head, you'd be wondering why she did these things and why she wasn't thinking about doing these things. But because you're a little bit distant, you can just be like, okay, she's acting in this way, and it's a little creepy almost. Notice how all the descriptive language alludes to fire in this chapter. Yeah, that's a good point. That's actually a really good point. Considering how important fire and blood. And fire both giving and extinguishing life. Yes, which is foreshadowing for the end of the book when she wakes the dragons. Weak, I am strong, Jorah. To please him, she reclined on a pile of cushions. Tell me how my child died. He never lived, my princess. The women say he faltered, and Dany saw how the flesh hung loose on him and the way he limped when he moved. Tell me what the women say. He turned his face away. His eyes were haunted. They say the child was... She worried, but Sir Jorah would not say it. His face grew dark with shame. He looked half a corpse. Monstrous, Miraz Murder finished for him. Okay, so that is a really good moment because it's like this thing is so horrible he can't say it, but then like this dumpy old woman can say it, and that gives her a sense of like power, and you get a sense for her strength and otherworldliness. It's a really clever way of characterizing her in that way and giving the magic weight. The knight was a powerful man, yet Dany understood in that moment that the Magi was stronger and crueler and infinitely more dangerous. Okay, so basically what I just said. I think this is, again, a little abstract, but I think, again, it kind of underscores the point. And sometimes you have to do that. Twisted. I drew him forth myself. He was scaled like a lizard, blind, with the stub of a tail and small leather wings like the wings of a bat. When I touched him, the flesh slid off the bone, and inside he was full of grave worms and the stink of corruption. He had been dead for years. So great. So a couple of things. He had been dead. Like, this is such a weird idea that she had a kid that was like gross looking. And the other thing is we never really get any confirmation from this. Like, we never really hear from anybody else if this is what happened or not. And the idea he had been dead for years when he hadn't even actually been pregnant that long. Let's see. The other thing is, okay, so he was scaled like a lizard. So there's this theory that the reason that the Targaryens or the Valyrians could ride dragons is that they actually have like some dragon blood in them. Like they bred the dragons and they bred themselves. And one of the things is that you see this in a lot of the history for the Targaryens is that when there's weird blood mutagenic things happening, they tend to start their babies like become stillborn and turn into dragons. Like this is not the first time this has happened. And so like when you put a weird magic power in a Targaryen, it's like it speaks to their dragon blood and they come out weird and scaly. Again, I think this happened to 2 or 3 Targaryens in Blood and Fire and before that as well. But it's just like a weird mutagenic property of their blood. Darkness, Dany thought, the terrible darkness sweeping up behind to devour her. If she looked back, she was lost. Oh, that's another thing. This will become another one of her arc words. If she looked back, she was lost. Sunk cost, having to push forward through things that are tough, will become words that instead of that encapsulate that idea. My son was alive and strong when Sir Jerry carried me into the tent, she said. I could feel him kicking, fighting to be born. So again, is she lying? That may be as it may be, answered Miraz Murder. Yet the creature that came forth from your wound was as I said. Death was in that tent, Khaleesi. Only shadows, Sir Jorah husked, but Dany could hear the doubt in his voice. I saw a magi. I saw you alone, dancing with the shadows. The grave cast long shadows, Iron Lord. Mary said, long and dark, and in the end, no light can hold them back. Very, again, plausible deniability. He didn't see anyone else. Maybe he did, and maybe he's trying to hide it, but by being a secondhand account, we don't know for sure. And the idea that like those were like ghosts or things from beyond like the light, it's a very cool idea. And shadows are again like one of the types of magic in A Song of Ice and Fire, basically. Sir Jorah had killed her son, Dany knew. He had done what he did for love and loyalty, yet he still carried her into a place no living man should go and fed her baby to the darkness. He knew it too, the gray face, the hollow eyes, the limp. The shadows have touched you too, Sir Jorah, she told him. The knight made no reply. Dany turned to the god's wife. You warned me that only death could pay for life. I thought you meant the horse. No, Miraz Murder said. That was a lie you told herself. You knew the price. Had she? Had she? If I look back, I am lost. So again, it's kind of that, it also speaks again to that kind of like old mythological, like, be very careful what you ask the elves for because they'll use your wording against you, which kind of makes the magic feel more elemental, I think, a little bit because it links back to it. You knew the price. And this is Marazdir being like, no, I gave you the rope to hang yourself, but you knew what was going on. If I look back, I am lost. Again, those arc words are going to become really important. And then Limburg said, also, he'd been dead for years, so perhaps magic transcends time, and if so, the wolf shape in Murray's fire might be, and the man wreathed in fire. I don't want to write out in the case I'm wrong. Yeah, so that's another thing, is that there's a lot of intercutting often with Dany seeing kind of things that are happening in Westeros. And, it's actually also kind of an interesting idea that maybe her baby wasn't weird and born, but she kind of pulled something out of the darkness through the channel of, like, the baby in the womb. The italics got wiped out when I copy and pasted it, which is annoying. Part of it is I find Martin's use of that really compelling because A, I think in a monologue like a lot, and B, I tend to have intrusive thoughts and reoccurring phrases that will play through my head, and so to me that it's actually how I think he's mirroring it, and so to me I find it really effective. The price was paid, Dany said. The horse, my child, Quaron Quatho Hagon Kolo. The price was paid and paid. She rose from the cushions. Where's Khal Drogo? Show him to me, wife, Magi, blood mage, whatever you were. Show me Khal Drogo. Show me what I bought with my son's life. I do like that Dany is actually quite a strong character in a lot of ways, in that there is a boldness to her that I think fits well. Though I don't know. Okay, so sometimes Martin's characters all kind of feel a little bit samey when they're taking on this boldness tone. It's almost like it's a kind of character he can write really well, so he defaults to it sometimes. And to me, it doesn't always feel completely in keeping with the characters. I don't know that I would quite describe it as a problem, but it's something I noticed when I first read the series, and I really noticed it again. Like, this is kind of the same way like Jon Snow would say this. And also you're like, he's 15, she's 15. How are they coming up with this kind of boldness? I need to look at it more though to see if it was really a problem. Okay, she sees the impact of what happened. Nobody's around anymore. Drogo's Khalasar is gone, she said. The Khal who cannot ride is no Khal, said Drogo. There was no way to hold them. Kopono left first, named himself Khal Pono, and many followed him. Jacques was not long to do the same. The rest slipped away by night in large bands and small. There are a dozen new Khalasars on the Dothraki Sea, where once there was only Drogos. The old remain, said Aggo, the frightened, the weak, and the sink. And we who swore, we remain. That's such a big thing in these books, is it's always like, the one person who's holding the line. Okay. The last thing I wanted to talk about is, so a lot of buildup of what happened. Another thing to notice here is that, like, the way Martin distributes information is really nice, and that we didn't find out any of this stuff really until she got out of the tent and could see it. And then we're finding it out through dialogue. It's not like she's thinking about it, and it's not like it's being summarized too much. It's being relayed through dialogue at a time that feels like this is when she would know. They could have told her this information much earlier, but there was already a lot of information that needed to come out. That's one of the things I've seen, is people often have trouble knowing how to dole out information. Let's see. Okay. Now bring me to Khal Drogo. He was laying on the bare red earth, staring up at the sun. A dozen blood flies had settled on his body, though he did not seem to feel them. Dany knew them and brushed them away and knelt beside him. His eyes were open, but he did not see, and she knew at once he was blind. And he's basically catatonic. And this is like such a cruel twist of fate. Again, she should have been more careful in her wording. Should have had like a whole contract to have Maria's master sign. Dany kissed her sun and stars gently on the brow and stood to face Maria Master. So gently could probably be gotten rid of, but specifically one of the things that works here, she calls them the sun and stars, which is like their word for like babe or honey or whatever. And so by using that name specifically, it brings a certain intimacy to it. Again, just a small thing that really works. Look at it here. Dany's swearing her first blood oath, an eerie echo of the future. Okay, so one of the things is that, just very quickly, that Khal Drogo's like two buddies, homies, like left on their own, and she swore vengeance against them. And I think all of us, for 20 years, between this chapter and the publication of Dance and Dragons, thought that wasn't going to go anywhere and was just going to be like, oh, well, like you just kind of forget. And no, and then the last chapter of A Dance with Dragons, she's like, I'm back on the Dothraki Sea. The Khalasar of one of these people have shown up. It's time to wreck shit up. And you're like, oh shit, I did not expect that to come back. Your spells are costly, Magi. He lives, Miraz Murder said. You asked for life, you paid for life. This is not life for one who was Drogo. His life was laughter and meat roasting over a fire pit and a horse rode between his legs. His life was an arak in his hand and his bells ringing in his hair as he rode to meet an enemy. His life was his blood riders and me and the son I was to give him. Okay, so notice we have rule of threes again. Laughter, meat roasting, horse between his legs. His life was an arak, bells. Well, okay, that's only two. But also kind of riding to meet an enemy is the third one there. 1, 2, 3. Again, and we have specifics and threes. It's a very strong formula that Martin uses a lot. When will he be as he was? Dany demanded. When the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, said Mirazmaster. When the seas go dry and mountains blow in the winds like leaves. When your womb quickens again and you bear a living child. Then he will return and not before. Everyone in the series, all of the fans of it, love to try to figure out what these things are. Like the sun rises in the west and sets in the east is supposed to have to do with the mortals, and then the winds blowing in the weed. Like, people really like to come up with that kind of stuff, but I really just love the language of it. It gives such a majesty and power and breadth to it. When the seas go dry and mountains blow in the winds like leaves, like, it just feels epic. And I think that's one of the things that Martin can really do sometimes, is he can really make things feel epic. I would speak with this magi alone. You knew, Dany said when they were gone. She ached inside and out, but her fury gave her strength. You knew what I was buying, and you knew the price, and you let me pay it. It was wrong of them to burn my temple. The heavy, flat-nosed woman said placidly. That angered the great shepherd. She's such a great character. I love the way she's just, like, so passive-aggressive. This was no god's work, Dany said coldly. If I look back, I am lost. You cheated me. You murdered my child within me. The stallion who mounts the world will burn no cities now. His classer tramples no nations into dust. I spoke for you, she said, anguished. I saved you. Saved me, the Lazarene woman said. And then she talks about how terrible everything was. Before that, your life. Mary Mazdur laughed cruelly. Look to your cow and see what life is worth when all the rest is gone. Such a good comeback. And there's such justice to it. And again, when I first read this, I was like on Dany's side. I was like, fuck her. But again, it kind of complicates it. And it's the way that Martin can do cognitive dissonance in his characters in a way that you can't, that a lot of other authors struggle with. I talked about this in Fourth Wing, that there is no real subjectivity to the characters. The characters think a thing and it's true, pretty much. So the mountains blow like leaves in the wind is a hard one for me. The sun has already risen in the west and set in the east, as far as I know. Yeah, well, I think that was Quentin, the son of the sun. I think the mountains blowing like the leaves is supposed to be the pyramids of Marine blowing with her dragon flame. But that comeback is such a philosophical argument as well. It really is. And again, it kind of shows this weird, like, sort of passive phrasing that Martin is able to make active, because she's not like saying like, your life, there's a certain passive way to how she's stating it. My brain is too gone now. So that's going to be more or less it for today, because again, my brain is kind of dribbling out my ear a little bit. But I want to talk about some of the takeaways. So cognitive dissonance, he's really good at doing that. He's really good at the distance, at what distance you should be from Dany at any given point, and how that affects what's going on. Again, some of the things she does would feel weird if you were closer to her in terms of like the camera. For me, it's an example of Martin's unexpected occasional poetry. Yeah, he does. Again, I think he's actually really poetic at times. He's very underrated in that way, and that everyone's like, oh, well, his prose are really workmanlike. And I'm like, are they, or are they kind of great sometimes? Again, when you're dealing with such a large volume of writing, sometimes he just isn't. Like, I mean, there are chapters that aren't great, but there are chapters that are legitimately really well written, just in terms of their prose. Yeah, all right. So cognitive dissonance is a good way of doing that. The distance is a good way of doing that. The magic, it needs build up and it needs falling action. You need a certain amount of plausible deniability to it. And again, I think the cultural weight of the magic is really important, in that you see the cultural weight of it bursting apart into this physical kind of craziness, and there's an acceleration to it, and a claustrophobia and a horror, because the characters aren't great. They're not doing the best things that they could. There's a certain complicity in it, and again, there's a certain kind of harkening back to an older type of, like, not a D&D mage throwing a spell, but a like making a deal with the devil in folklore kind of a feel to it. And I think all those things kind of combine to make the magic feel really weird. And then just also weird imagery. And again, there's a certain passivity in his phrasing that I find interesting, in terms of how it then kind of whips around and hits you in an active way. But yeah, this was the first of Will's Song of Ice and Fire hour. I'm gonna probably try to do about one of these a month. We'll see. I feel like in certain ways there was a lot of dead air this time. In that I kind of the thing about it is that if I had read the chapter beforehand, I probably could have figured out some of the stuff and then put comments and then gone through those comments with you guys. But I hate doing homework. Which is kind of what that would be. And so this is really more like almost me doing research while talking with you guys. And then I don't know if I ever made this into a video, I would shorten it up with specific examples. Like if this was like a video essay or something I was working on. But yeah, this was kind of fun, I think. Let me know what you guys think. Nobody was here for the live stream portion, except for some of our most lovely patrons, Lindbergh, Angry Otter, Allie Snow, Max, and Maggie. Shout out to all you guys. You guys are the OGs. But if you watch this later, let me know what you guys think. And let me know which other chapters you'd like me to do. Have you read the books at all? You are OG, Angry Otter. That's very funny. Okay. All right. Talk to y'all later.